After the success of Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, fans were understandably eager for the next installment of the franchise. And who could blame them? After all, the lead development team at Raven Software were 3 for 3 on fan-favorite games like X-Men Legends 1, X-Men Legends 2, and Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, the latter of which ended with a hype-inducing cliffhanger suggesting that Galactus would be the lead villain of the sequel. Even though fans would get their wish of a sequel 3 years later in 2009, not everything was as they expected. So let's start at the beginning with some pre-release history of Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2.
Bravo team, come in. Come in. Bravo, do you copy?
Nothing new to me so far. But Black Ops aren't really SOP for you boys, are they? How'd Fury get you?
Same way he got you two, I expect. Everyone owes that old warhorse favors, and he always calls them in sooner or later. Could be much worse than this.
Yeah, but don't you guys wonder, I mean, invading a foreign country? Like we're soldiers of fortune or something?
I've known Nick Fury a very long time, Spider-Man. We wouldn't be doing this without a good reason.
Oh, wringing your little hands over the poor Latverians, huh? You think they do the same for you?
To start, the tried-and-true development studio of the previous games, Raven Software, would no longer be helming the sequel, but instead head to work on the X-Men Origins Wolverine movie tie-in game. Although Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 would still be published by Activision, the role of developer would now belong to Vicarious Visions. Vicarious Visions were not entirely new to the world of Marvel Ultimate Alliance though, since they were in charge of porting both Ultimate Alliance 1 and X-Men Legends 2 onto the PSP. For Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, they would now tackle the PS3 and Xbox 360 editions, which are the versions we'll be discussing today. However, the gameplay you'll be seeing throughout this video is from the PS4 Remastered Edition, which is based on those prior versions. Raven Software set a high bar with Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, so Vicarious Visions would have their work cut out for them to meet or exceed those expectations. To help accomplish their goal, they have revamped the whole engine that Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1 was created on. But the biggest innovation that Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 brings to the table is its fusion system, where two characters can now combine their powers for massive attacks like they can in the comics. It's a great system and Vicarious Visions were so proud of it, they originally intended for the title to be Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 Fusion. This was the working title when the game was initially revealed back in 2008, but sometime later they decided to drop the fusion aspect of the title. I'm not sure why, but my guess is that the word fusion is in direct contrast with the themes of the Civil War storyline, which is all about our heroes being separated from each other due to disagreements. Very much not in fusion. By the way, just a quick disclaimer, the remainder of this video will discuss major spoilers for the game, as well as spoilers for the Secret War and Civil War comic series. So if you plan on playing this for yourself first, or reading those story arcs, you may want to pause here and return to this video later on. But speaking of Civil War, instead of creating an original story like in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, the decision was made to largely base the sequel story on the insanely popular Civil War comic series that had just wrapped up in 2007. You might be familiar with the movie version of Civil War, which has a similar foundation of being Team Cap or Team Iron Man, choosing a side either for or against superhero registration. But that's about where those similarities end, with the comics going in a much different direction. However, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 will take a ton of inspiration from the Civil War comics, with some scenes being almost identical to the comic panels.
This is just completely insane, Hill. I won't do it.
I'm sorry, was it not clear I was giving you an order?
You're asking me to arrest people who risk their lives for this country every day.
No, I'm ordering you to obey the will of the American people, Captain. Either you help us bring them in, or we'll bring you in.
Weapons down, gentlemen. Or I...
Trank darts, now! Take him down! Take him down!
Keep us moving, son, if you want to stay conscious.
You idiot. We were trying to save lives.
I would say that the whole middle section of the game follows the story of Civil War, with a few key story differences taking place at the end. The beginning of the story is based on the Secret War comic series, where Nick Fury decides to secretly invade Latveria and attempt to assassinate their new leader, Lucia von Bardis. Like with Civil War, Ultimate Alliance 2 will borrow heavily from the Secret War story, but that's not a bad thing, and I would say that I like how they are able to blend these two comic stories together into a cohesive narrative for the game. But I think now is a good time to explore the story itself and see how it plays out.
game, my boy.
I ain't your boy, Stark.
All right, that should do it. Won't be any Latverian air support bothering us on our way to Castle Doom now. We'll take it on foot and bring in Bravo team once we hit checkpoint 3.
On foot. You're kidding, right? Do you have any idea how little arch support I get in this outfit?
Put a sock in it, webhead.
How socks make it worse, actually.
All right, ladies, let's move, now!
The opening cinematic starts in a familiar location from the last game, Latveria, the home of Dr. Doom. But if you remember from the last game, Doom was struck down by Odin and taken to Asgard to be punished. In his absence, Latveria needed a new ruler and Lucia von Bardus was elected. Fury has figured out that Lucia von Bardus has been secretly supplying the Tinkerer with resources so that he can create high-tech weapons. Fury wants to stop Lucia before things get out of hand, but he needs the US government to sign off on it since she's the leader of another country. Unfortunately, the president views Lucia and Latveria very favorably and won't let Fury handle things.
The evidence is right here, sir. We're under attack.
Colonel Fury, since Dr. Doom's death, Lucia von Bardus has bent over backwards to mend the ties between America and Latveria. We got her elected. This year alone, we lent her country $72 million in aid.
Yes, sir. And it hurts to imagine what she's done with that money, knowing what we now know.
Thank you, Colonel.
I have a recommended response scenario for the
That won't be necessary.
So Fury decides to go behind the president's back and lead an unsanctioned Black Ops mission in Latveria to stop Lucia. To help him, he calls in a few favors which gets our heroes to reluctantly join him, but being as cryptic as ever, Fury won't divulge all the details of their mission. Even though our team doesn't fully trust Fury, they're willing to go along with him. Ultimately, Fury confronts Lucia and blows up her castle, presumably killing her in the collapse. 1 year later, Miss Marvel, not yet Captain Marvel, is investigating some gun-running rings in some tunnels underground. It turns out that there's more to this than gun-running, though, and it's discovered that Latverians are planning a terrorist attack on New York. We later discover that this attack is being led by Lucia von Bardus, who is actually alive and looking much more cybernetic now. We can assume that she survived the collapse of Castle Doom, and her body was saved using cybernetic parts. She has now returned to New York for revenge on Fury and his team, and plans to achieve this revenge by firing bombs on the city from a boat. We of course defeat Lucia, but a ton of damage has already been done. Worse yet, the public has managed to find out about Fury's unsanctioned mission, which causes him to go into hiding. Iron Man and Captain America weren't aware that the Latveria mission wasn't approved by the government, but they're caught in the middle of this mess all the same. This secret mission of Fury's and the destruction that resulted from Lucia's retaliation is basically what leads to the Superhuman Registration Act to be introduced, and this is how the Secret War story is bridged into Civil War. Tony Stark plans to debate the act at Congress while Captain America attempts to rally the citizens, but catastrophe strikes once again. Titanium Man has decided to attack Congress and take some senators hostage. Specifically, we have to save Senator Lieber, who's actually Stan Lee. After saving him, we'll get a moment to speak with him, and each playable character actually has their own unique dialogue with Stan. Here are some of my favorites.
Senator Lieber from New York State, good to meet you. You've done us a great service. You heroes are okay in my book. Maybe we should put this registration business on hold.
We'll appreciate anything you can do in that regard, sir.
I'm not saying I'm gonna get on a soapbox about this thing, but I'll pull a few strings if I can. You heroes are okay in my book. Maybe we should put this registration business on hold.
Whoopee! Hooray for us heroes.
You know, in my day, someone like you wouldn't really be considered a hero, but we'll let it slide. You heroes are okay in my book. Maybe we should put this registration business on hold.
I assume that would beat my tearing your damn face off.
What a charmer. You kiss your mother with that mouth? You heroes are okay in my book. Maybe we should put this registration business on hold.
No kidding, bub. You can't expect the X-Men to reveal their names to the...
Say no more, Knucklehead. Not everyone fears and hates mutants. Well, best of luck trying to catch that maniac. Like our state motto says, Excelsior.
Don't I know you from somewhere?
You don't look like the voting type.
But after saving Senator Lieber, we now have to face off with Titanium Man, who appears in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Before we fight, he'll give us a speech about how we are once again a nation divided. The whole fight will take place in front of the statue of Abraham Lincoln, a real-life hero who was able to end the United States Civil War during his presidency. I don't have any profound insights into the symbolism here, but I think Titanium Man chose this location for the fight as a symbol of our nation's division in the past, and how we are about to divide once again. Since after we beat him, he claims that we've already lost.
You think you've won, but you haven't. You'll soon see. You have already lost everything.
With Titanium Man out of the way, Tony is now able to testify at Congress regarding the prevention of the Superhuman Registration Act. As he leaves, he's surprised to find Captain America in his limo. Here we get our final interactions between Steve and Tony before Civil War begins. Tony Stark, always the futurist, basically prophesizes that they're only one superhuman mistake away from registration.
This Registration Act would tear down everything we've done, destroy a century-old tradition of...
I'm trying to save it, Steve. As much of it as I can, anyway. Don't you see where this is headed? All it's going to take is one more slip-up by anyone in a cape, and we'll be lucky if registration is the worst they do.
This leads us into a scene 3 days later, and is essentially where the Civil War comic story begins and takes center stage. Tony is at Stark Tower watching the New Warriors reality TV show. The New Warriors are a team of young superheroes who are trying to improve their show's ratings by taking on some higher caliber supervillains. The New Warriors reality show is basically like Cops or Dog the Bounty Hunter, but with superpowers. The New Warriors happen upon a hideout for supervillain prison escapees, but instead of calling in some more experienced heroes like the Avengers, they try to take them on themselves. The most important of these matchups, and the one we witness on screen, is Namorita attempting to take down Nitro. Nitro's superpower is that he can self-explode, which he does here and destroys Stamford, Connecticut. This is of course a devastating attack both in the amount of lives lost, but also in the rifts it will create between the superhuman community and the world in general. The New Warriors are viewed as careless with their powers, and superheroes are ultimately blamed for the Stamford devastation, which gets the Superhuman Registration Act enacted immediately. We then cut to the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier clip that we watched earlier, where Captain America and newly appointed S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Maria Hill are having an argument about arresting superhumans who oppose the Superhuman Registration Act, or SRA as I'll be referring to it from here on out. Hill finally gives Cap an ultimatum, resulting in Cap going on the run. Afterwards, we find Iron Man on the side of registration.
Registration can go forward as planned. We'll take care of Captain America.
This leads us into the big moment of the game, which side will you choose? Before taking the leap, you can hear opposing viewpoints from Luke Cage and Mr. Fantastic, with Luke Cage being on Cap's side and Reed siding with Iron Man. To further add some weight to your decision, some characters will be locked depending on the side you pick. For example, if you side with Iron Man, you can say goodbye to Captain America, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist, which is what I did for my first playthrough, as I ultimately decided to side with the SRA. I ended up going back and replaying the story from Captain America's perspective too, so I'll do my best to cover both angles from here on out, but since the story splits here, things might get a little bit complex. Overall, the story still follows the same general arc and missions, just swapping certain cutscenes and characters out depending on the side you chose. As a quick aside, I did enjoy replaying from the other side and getting to see the different perspectives. Even though the story ends the same way, it's interesting to see the other side and how things play out differently, almost in a sort of what-if scenario. Although, the game will alter a bit depending on your side. For example, if you're on Iron Man's team, you'll be forced to fight Spider-Woman after she barricades a door. After beating her, Black Widow will blow up a side door for you to continue through. But if you play as Captain America's team, you'll find this main door is instead barricaded by Black Widow, and you'll be forced to fight her as a boss, with Spider-Woman swooping in to take Black Widow away. So some minor alterations are made to each level depending on the side you pick, instead of it being a direct perspective shift like you would expect to see in something like Vantage Point or Pulp Fiction. The mission briefing cutscenes do offer that direct perspective shift that you would expect though, with different mission briefings depending on your side. This is nice because it can fill in gaps of the story that you may not have picked up on in your first playthrough. But the gameplay missions themselves are mostly the same. You'll still be traversing the same levels, just with different bosses. So let's pick up with our first mission, which is mostly about resources and trying to slow down the other side. If you're on Cap's side, you'll be trying to free Cable from captivity, which will result in a boss fight against Bishop. If you're on Iron Man's side, you'll be trying to prevent Cap's side from obtaining more weapons and resources, including the prevention of a valuable data transfer to Cap, which results in a boss fight against Cable. Between the two fights, the Bishop fight adds an extra layer of destroying his power sources, so his fight is a bit more fun. Our next mission takes place a couple weeks later. In that span of time, Iron Man's side has begun implementing some new strategies. Their most controversial and unsavory strategy is that they will begin injecting supervillains with nanites to control their impulses, essentially making them puppets. There's no way this can go wrong, right? Well, that's what we'll be asking Reed Richards, who assures us that everything is fine, but it's clear the nanite program isn't operating as expected.
Most definitely. Apart from a few minor glitches, the behavior control system worked perfectly in our field tests. Glitches is probably too strong a word. We noticed some side signals on the network we didn't expect. That's it. We're monitoring the system very closely to prevent anything like that from ever happening.
The next big implementation from Iron Man's side is a newly created prison in a dimension called the Negative Zone. The prison is codenamed Prison 42 and is considered inescapable. Prison 42 will house all superpowered criminals, including captured heroes who are not registered with the SRA. The only way in and out of Prison 42 is via portals, with the only functioning one currently residing on Rikers Island. Cap has found out that a lot of his captured allies will soon be transferred to Rikers Island, so they can be portaled into Prison 42. Cap's plan is to intercept the convoys holding his allies before they are imprisoned. If you're on Iron Man's side, your objective will be to protect those convoys. You'll start off by traversing the rooftops as you make your way across town. If you're playing on Team Iron Man, you'll occasionally be aided by nanite-controlled supervillains, which is a cool inclusion that you won't get from Cap's side. Either way, you'll end up on the streets where the convoys have been intercepted. Sticking with Iron Man's perspective, you'll be fighting against Multiple Man, who is able to escape from one of the convoys. If you're playing for Team Cap, S.H.I.E.L.D. will deploy a nanite-controlled villain, Lady Deathstrike, to fight you. After defeating whichever boss is thrown at you, Benjamin Grimm, aka The Thing, will show up. He's been sitting on the fence and not choosing a side, but he'll be convinced to join you from here on out. Next, you'll go back up to the rooftops to either chase down Iron Man or Captain America with his escaped allies. If you're chasing Iron Man, he'll inform you that he led you into a trap, and you'll be forced to fight against Giant Hank Pym, aka Yellow Jacket. On the flip side, if you're chasing Cap, you'll be intercepted by his giant ally Bill Foster, aka Goliath. Just another aside, I think this is the best and most unique boss fight of the whole game. It's a great surprise, and both Yellow Jacket and Goliath are both incredibly intimidating. They also aren't just straight up punch-out boss fights either, since you'll have to dodge their attacks and time your hits with their recovery. But after defeating these giant men, each team will return back to their respective hubs. We then cut to another 2 weeks later, which is where the Civil War story will reach its peak. Iron Man has set up a fake emergency at a nearby chemical plant, making it appear as though hundreds of workers are trapped. Captain America and his team spring into action to save the workers, but immediately realize something isn't right. Before they can react, Cloak is knocked out, essentially trapping them at the chemical plant. Iron Man reveals himself and attempts to talk things out with Captain America. Let's see how it goes.
Skybird 1, is the area fully cordoned?
Roger, perimeter sealed. No one's leaving the zone without our say-so.
Copy that. Stand by.
Stand by? You and S.H.I.E.L.D. going soft, Tony?
We didn't come here to arrest you, Cap. I talked S.H.I.E.L.D. into offering all of you a chance at amnesty.
You mean surrender? Thanks, but I think I'd rather take my chances.
Cap, please. You know how hard I tried to fight this. But that was before Stamford. The public doesn't want secret identities anymore. Registration is the only way to make them feel safe when we're around. Just give me a chance to tell you our plans for my 21st century overhaul.
You've got 5 minutes.
That's all I'll need. What the hell?
With the war fully on, you'll battle through forces of the other team until you reunite with your leader. You'll then help your side either beat Captain America or Iron Man. Whichever side you're aligned with will win the fight, but that won't stop your opponent from breaking free and escaping. Regardless of what side you're on, you'll be tasked to go help out somewhere else, which is when the game's story will start to shift away from the Civil War comic series and veer into Vicarious Vision's original take on the ending, and also merge the split perspective storytelling back into one constant story not dictated by the side you picked, which is a blessing for me because this was getting tough for me to compile together coherently. But while the fight rages on, the heroes will be too preoccupied fighting each other to pay attention to the nanite-controlled supervillains. Unbeknownst to everyone, the nanites that control the supervillains have started to form a hive mind of their own. The supervillains are still puppets, unable to control their own wills, but now they're being controlled by the nanites instead of their handlers at S.H.I.E.L.D. The mind-controlled supervillains will next try to sabotage the chemical plant, but not before Nick Fury catches on to their plan. It turns out, Nick has left a robot version of himself at the chemical plant as a way to keep tabs on everything. As he's surveilling the villains, he's caught and is forced to run away. This is where we run into him and he requests our aid. The plan is for Fury to detach the 4 bombs that have been planted while we distract the Green Goblin and Venom. Unfortunately, Fury struggles with the last bomb and it goes off. Our team is presumed dead, but we are actually located and saved by a group of Fury's robots, which are called life model decoys. We're then taken back to Fury's hidden S.H.I.E.L.D. bunker where he fills us in on what he knows. At this point in the story, Fury doesn't know that the nanites have formed their own collective conscience, so he's attempting to learn more about them. In order to do so, he needs data directly from Stark servers on Rikers Island, the same place where the portal to the Negative Zone is being held. Luckily and coincidentally, Captain America and his forces are planning to break into Rikers Island so they can access that portal to free their allies. Fury's plan is for us to follow behind Captain America's forces, and while they're too busy fighting each other, we'll sneak in and steal that data. And that's exactly what we do. In the process, we're confronted by Penance, a newer character who is tasked to control the portal. In order to reach the portal, we'll have to fight Penance, but after defeating him, he'll learn about our goals and decide to join our team. Penance may seem like a weird choice for a character in the game, but he's actually a really interesting inclusion since his origins are wrapped into Civil War. Remember the New Warriors whose showdown with Nitro was the catalyst for the SRA to be enacted? Well, the New Warriors all died in that explosion, with the exception of one member named Speedball. Speedball survived due to his kinetic field, but was launched 500 miles away. He was eventually found by S.H.I.E.L.D. and placed in custody. Reed Richards was running tests on him and learned that Speedball's powers were evolving. He still has his energy powers, but they are now triggered by his own pain. Driven by the guilt he feels for his involvement in the Stamford incident, he decides to join the Registration Act, but requests a new suit, which is the one we see him wearing in the game. This suit has spikes inside of it that stab him as a way to augment his powers through his pain. There's a pretty haunting audio file where he describes the suit too.
What I'm doing is penance. 612 people died at Stamford, so every day I'll carry with me 612 points of pain. The 60 children who died, those are the longer spikes. They'll hurt me the most.
You sure you don't just want another Speedball costume? I could.
Speedball is dead. All that's left of me now is penance.
There's even a compartment in his suit for blood to drain out, so he's thought of everything. I actually like this character a lot though, possibly because he adds a darker layer to the tone of Civil War. His gameplay is also unique in that his stat boosts often relate to his power being boosted while he's in low health, so you'll often be juggling his health state as a way to enhance his damage. Before I knew all of this, I thought Penance was a really obscure inclusion to the game, but now I actually really like that he was put in the game, and I like the attention to detail with his abilities. But let's get back to the story. Once we send the data back to Nick Fury, he's able to determine what I already spoiled earlier, that the nanites have formed a collective conscience, and that their goal is to infect everyone on the planet until everyone is under their control. Kind of like a zombie plague. But we still need more information on how to stop the nanite invasion, which requires us to get an unused nanite sample from the Negative Zone prison. Along with Human Fury, we teleport into Prison 42. After a lot of fighting, we manage to collect our sample. Meanwhile, the Civil War rages on and Cap is able to shut down the prison's power, releasing all the captive superheroes, but also all of the nanite-controlled supervillains. Earlier, Fury had attempted to warn Cap and Stark about the nanites, but they both didn't care, instead focusing more on the war at hand.
Never thought the cavalry would look quite like that, but I'll take it. Nanite control, watch what you're doing to those prisoners. They just... Damn it, Swanson! Get those prisoners attacking the right targets!
We're trying, sir, but they're not responding. The inhibitor transmissions aren't having any effect!
Then swipe their nanochains! Shut them down, now!
No effect, Mr. Stark! The villains are completely out of control!
You don't say.
Now with the villains free in large quantities and unresponsive shield control, Cap and Iron Man are forced to acknowledge that Fury was right. The upside is that Cap and Iron Man align together again, at least temporarily, to defeat this mutual enemy. However, there is still more bad news. After returning back from the Negative Zone, it's realized that Nick Fury never returned. I'll let the mystery of his disappearance lie for now, but don't worry, we'll definitely talk about the fate of Nick Fury. Fury isn't the only one missing though, and 3 days later, a funeral service is held for all of the heroes presumed dead.
We may not know the true fate of Nicholas Fury, but we do know he showed his willingness to sacrifice himself on behalf of us all. For him, and for the rest of the missing and presumed deceased, we ask Almighty God to watch over their souls. Amen.
Back at Fury's hidden shield bunker, Reed Richards' scanner picks up a surge of nanite activity indicating that it's starting to spread. One major invasion that's taking place is in Wakanda, which is where we'll be going next. This level is one of my favorites, even just on a visual level, but it also starts to lead us into the climax of the story. Black Panther is guiding us through Wakanda while also calling allies in other countries for aid, only to find that they are being overrun as well. At one point, we're greeted by a hologram of Nick Fury, who reveals that he has also been injected by the nanites, now calling themselves the Fold. We successfully prevent the invasion of Wakanda, but the rest of the world hasn't been so lucky. Using Wakanda as a temporary base of operations, Reed Richards was able to cure Venom and Green Goblin of the nanites, who will now join our team as playable characters. Reed was also able to identify towers that broadcast the nanite signal across the world. Reed's theory is that if we reach the centralmost tower and upload a shutdown virus into the tower, it would spread across the world and shut down all nanite-infected people, allowing them to be cured as well. The central tower is located in Iceland, which is where our final showdown will take place. Once we make it to the top of the tower and defeat a barrage of nanite-infected enemies, we successfully broadcast the virus signal. But the signal is stalled and we are introduced to our final battle against Nanite Nick Fury. And no, this is not something that happens in the comics, this is an original creation for the game. It seems that the nanites have merged with Fury and created a cybernetic body on top of him. The Fold has been using him as a kind of leader or primary resource since he has so much top secret knowledge about superheroes, and the Fold are targeting heroes first. Fury is of course being used as a mind-controlled puppet, but we have no choice but to beat the hell out of him. Nanite Fury is a pretty decent boss fight though. He can channel the powers of other nanite-controlled heroes and villains, as we can see with Electro and Havoc. But after taking enough punches, Fury will start to expel the auras of those characters as if he was just exorcised.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
But with Fury down for the count, Reed will be able to cure him and the remaining infected heroes of the nanites. We then cut to some point later where Fury is still recovering from the effects of the mind control. We get an awkward apology from Nick Fury, while Stark and Cap seem to have patched things up, walking side by side as they exit. To close out the story, we'll get a final news report that is determined by the side you picked. If you pick Team Iron Man, you'll learn that Congress has amended the SRA to allow heroes to register without revealing their secret identities. This will serve as a middle ground between both sides, and to top it all off, Tony Stark is appointed commander of S.H.I.E.L.D. Before the credits, we get one final speech by Tony in front of the Capitol building.
It's too easy to think of superheroes as weapons, something to be deployed like an arm of the military. But now, I understand better than I ever have, that that's not what they are. They're people. We heroes can work together, and in order to protect this world, we must. But from now on, our alliance will be forged in trust, not in fear or force. Because no threat can stand against us when we choose to act as one.
The pro-registration side winning and Stark becoming commander of S.H.I.E.L.D. is the ending to the actual Civil War comic, but the developers give us an alternate what-if ending for Cap. If you're on Cap's side, the SRA will be fully repealed, and Cap will give a final speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial.
During this conflict, nearly all of us got distracted from a hero's main responsibility, to help those who need it most.
Now, thanks to the actions of a small but steadfast team, we've been given another chance. We must not squander it, and we won't. We saw what could happen if all individuality were lost. But we were also reminded that there are some things we can only accomplish when we're united. Now, our alliance stands reforged, ready to meet whatever challenge might be next, together.
This ending is unique to the game's story, and I think it's a nice touch. With our summary of the story complete, I'd like to talk about how the game was received overall, go over some positives and negatives, and compare it a bit to the first game.
It's on me, and I'm taking the fall for this one.
You got that right.
Damn it, Stark. You think these things grow on trees?
I'm sure you've got plenty of backups, old man. You always do.
Enjoy your exile, Fury. Wherever you are. We'll just stay here and keep picking up the pieces.
We'll now turn to Metacritic, which showed the first game with a score of 82, compared to the sequel, which received a 73. I personally think that both of these scores are fair, with the second game feeling like a bit of a step down from the first. After replaying Ultimate Alliance 2, I've been struggling to pinpoint why I feel like that though. I genuinely enjoyed Ultimate Alliance 2, and I think that it brings a lot to the table and improves upon certain elements from the first game, so why doesn't it feel like the better game? Well, I think there are a couple reasons. I think the first thing you'll notice when you start the game is the difference in cinematic cutscenes. The first game's cutscenes were all created by a third-party studio called Blur Studio. These cinematics are absolutely gorgeous and are likely what most people remember about the first game. They still hold up today and give an initial impression of high quality. On the flip side, when you start Ultimate Alliance 2, you're greeted with an in-game cinematic that just doesn't compare to its predecessor. I think this gives an initial first impression of low quality, which starts the game on the wrong foot. If Ultimate Alliance 2 is a standalone game, this probably wouldn't be an issue, but you expect sequels to improve upon their predecessor, so this feels like a step backwards. It's unfortunate though, because in all reality, a lot has been improved for the sequel. The in-game graphics are a noticeable step up from the first game, and the engine itself has been upgraded. We'll discuss everything that Ultimate Alliance 2 excels at more in a moment, but first I want to continue exploring some of the criticisms I have for the game. The next criticism is of the story itself. I want to start by first saying that I don't think the story is bad per se, and I was actually very excited to see Civil War adapted back in 2009. But I have to admit, it didn't hit me the way I hoped. Some aspects did stick, but some were a bit underwhelming. For one, I never felt the weight of the two sides. As a player, we aren't really faced with the Civil War conflict until after the fight with Lucia von Bardus, but even then, we're sidetracked to chase Titanium Man. When the time comes to choose, I felt kind of rushed into a decision without much debate, besides hearing different viewpoints in Stark Tower. I imagine that most players largely made their decision based on what characters they liked on a particular team, instead of having a strong stance one way or the other. I know some of you don't fall into that category, but I'm speaking in broad strokes. What I'm mostly trying to say is that I felt like I was sleepwalking through the story. Also, I often didn't feel forced to reconsider the ethics of my side. That might be a lot to ask for in a game like Ultimate Alliance, but since the comic was able to really grab my attention and constantly require me to reconsider my position, I was hoping the game could do the same. In fact, there are some pretty big moments in the comics that were excluded from the game. For example, Iron Man and his team creating a clone of Thor that goes haywire and kills Goliath. I would initially think something like that would be too mature for Ultimate Alliance, but we did watch Doom kill a ton of heroes in the first game. There was also the plot of Spider-Man deciding to reveal his secret identity and later changing to Team Cap. These shocking plot points carry a lot of weight, and I can't help but wonder if the game would have been more impacting had it been willing to explore some of these moments. Admittedly, there are some points that do pressure your choice, and that's usually around a boss fight. There will often be some light dialogue before or after the fight, and it typically involves the antagonist, who is at one point your friend, basically telling you that you made the wrong choice and that you're an idiot.
You made a choice to follow those orders. You better be ready to face the consequences. I've got nothing else to say to you.
Idiots. Cap's completely lost it, gets handed a ridiculously generous offer, and punches us in the face for extending it. How far will you follow that zealot? Our only mistake was in thinking you people would listen to reason.
These moments did make me reconsider my position at times, and I liked how they were able to push me around a bit as a player. I just wish there had been more moments like that woven into the story, because I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of Civil War. There isn't really a right or wrong side, just a lot of gray area. Both sides have valid points, and both sides' leaders will make decisions you may not agree with. I ultimately sided with Iron Man on pro-registration, but Cap's perspective has a lot of merit to it as well. In fact, it's the side Stan Lee takes.
If we're just talking about superheroes, I think I might be against the act, because most superheroes don't need to be registered. They're not going to do anything wrong. They don't have to be controlled. It's only the superhero who turns bad. But if he turns bad, he's not really a superhero, is he?
So there it is, straight from the man himself. And I also want to add that I think it was a great idea to include different endings where your side wins, instead of sticking to the same ending regardless of the side you chose. And I think the game's ending is cleaner than the comics ending, since the comics left things more open-ended in order to continue branching storylines. Not to say the game's ending was perfect though. I like that we ended on the Wakandan level, but Nanite Nick Fury was incredibly underwhelming. I don't know what it is about final bosses that are some kind of fusion or out-of-character version of themselves, but they just never seem to grab me. The first examples that come to mind are of Titan Joker from Arkham Asylum and Ultron Sigma from Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. I'm not sure why that is though. Maybe it just feels like I'm not getting a true version of a villain? Is it just me, or do you all feel like that too? I'm having trouble pinpointing why Nick Fury was such a disappointment for me. Regardless, even though I appreciate Vicarious Visions trying to end the story in an original way, Nanite Nick Fury wasn't as fulfilling as I'd hoped, and kind of disappointing. But moving on, tying into the story itself is the level design. Right off the bat, I want to say that I don't think the level design is bad, but I do think it's limited by the choice to adapt Civil War. Unlike Ultimate Alliance 1, whose story served as a way to navigate us through the fantastical locations of the Marvel Universe, Civil War largely takes place in the United States. In hindsight, I think this led to the levels not feeling very distinct. We'll spend a lot of time on rooftops, tunnels, and city streets that all kind of blur together. After beating the game and looking back on my experience, I can't name exciting levels and moments that stood out to me in Ultimate Alliance 2 like I could in Ultimate Alliance 1. For example, I praised Arcade's Murder World, Mephisto's Realm, Doom's Castle, and Asgard in the last retrospective. For Ultimate Alliance 2, Latveria and Wakanda are the standouts, and those take place outside of the Civil War adaptation, with Latveria being part of the Secret War adaptation and Wakanda part of the developer's original story. It makes me wonder if those storylines were included as a way to diversify locations instead of just straight up focusing on the Civil War story. But like I said, I don't think the level design is bad, and a lot of it does look very good. I just think they're limited based on the source material, and it results in the levels feeling very samey or bland most of the time. But I think I've bullied the story and level design enough, so now let's turn to an aspect I think we can all agree on, the lack of alternate outfits. In Ultimate Alliance 1, each character had 4 unique outfits to choose from. In Ultimate Alliance 2, each character has a total of 2 outfits, including the default one that you start with. To make it worse, a lot of the unlockable ones just aren't good. This takes a lot of the excitement away from unlocking an alternate outfit, and again, gives the impression of lower quality and cheapness. That's at least the impression I'm given, and I'm not sure why we ended up with less outfits than the first game. If I had to guess, this was probably a feature that was left until later into development, and Vicarious Visions simply ran out of time to add more. This guess is based on the third game, which pretty much did the same thing. Only 2 outfits were added in the base game, and the developers promised to add 2 more for each character throughout the coming DLCs. So maybe Vicarious Visions simply ran out of time. Another feature that doesn't quite hit the mark is the new gear system, or medals. In the first game, you could attach 1 piece of gear to each character that will buff them individually. In Ultimate Alliance 2, you'll unlock medals that buff the whole team, but you only have 3 slots to place them. Trying to sift through all of the ones you've unlocked is tedious and not user-friendly, and led me to forget that it was even a feature for most of the game. Although I respect Vicarious Visions' decision to try and innovate on the gear system, I think it's unfortunately another area that falls flat. Another new feature that was added to Ultimate Alliance 2 is dialogue choice. When conversing with another character, you're given 3 options: aggressive, diplomatic, or defensive. The game will track how many times you select a certain option and reward you with a medal after you've crossed a certain threshold. It's a cool idea, but it doesn't really add anything to the game. It doesn't matter which dialogue option you pick, you'll still get similar responses and the game will continue the same way. It really only matters if you're wanting to get a certain medal. However, I do like that the dialogue options will be written differently based on the character you chose, with Gambit being the most fun in my opinion, speaking with his classic Cajun flair. I also noticed characters like Human Torch or Spider-Man will have more sarcastic responses compared to more straightforward characters. I really appreciate this attention to detail, even if I feel like the dialogue options aren't necessary. Like the first game, there are a few hero-specific interactions too. One example of a character-specific interaction is how the Thing will address Invisible Woman if she's on your team, and they'll have a more personal conversation.
Sheesh. You were right about them White Star guys, Susie. Seems like they'll stop at nothing. That ain't hard to believe. Okay, Susie, you sweet-talked me into it. Sign me up. I'm gonna stay here and make sure the cleanup goes nice and smooth. Call me later if you need my help.
Overall, I don't think any of these criticisms or faults of the game are detrimental in their own right and could be overlooked had the rest of the game been stronger. I think cumulatively, they all add up to give the impression of a lower quality game compared to MUA1. I want to stress the word impression here because I don't know why all of these decisions were made, but they ultimately feel like a step down from the first game. Less costumes, no high quality cutscenes, less memorable levels, weaker gear system, all of these things add up for the player and give the impression of a weaker game, and I think that's why Ultimate Alliance 2 feels like an inferior game as a whole when compared to its predecessor. I've also glossed over the Galactus cliffhanger from the first game. I don't count his exclusion as a negative, but I do think we should discuss it.
Such insignificant creatures. They dare steal from Galactus. For that, I will destroy their planet.
As I've alluded to previously, the Galactus storyline is sidestepped in favor of the Civil War story, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It even technically occurs in the continuity, since it is briefly mentioned by Thor in Stark Tower.
Well, a long tale, my friend. Best told over a good meal. I shall regale you with it another time, perhaps. I'm sure you would, mortal, but now is not the time.
This feels very disappointing and anticlimactic after the first game, but I think the vagueness was a way to leave the door open for the third game to explore that story if Vicarious Visions or another developer wanted to return to it. Unfortunately, that never happened. But with the benefit of hindsight, I can't help but wonder what Ultimate Alliance 2 would have been like had Vicarious Visions been willing to continue the path laid out by Raven Software. I even think a lot of my criticisms might have been mitigated had they done so. For one, Vicarious Visions could have created their own original story culminating in a boss fight against Galactus. I did mention that their boss fights against giant characters were a highlight for me, so perhaps they could have done this on a grander scale for Galactus. The levels could have been more unique and expanded to areas of the Marvel Universe that weren't explored in the first game. Even if Blur Studio wasn't brought back, this might have been enough to make Ultimate Alliance 2 a better experience compared to the first game. So I'm not saying that Vicarious Visions were wrong to go the route of Civil War. I was certainly excited to see it adapted in 2009, but now in 2021, it's interesting to think about how things might have been different if the Galactus story played out. But that concludes my criticism section, and at this point, I hope you're not enraged at me, and I know you may not agree with all of these points, some of them could even be my own bias, but after completing the game and taking a week or so to try to get my thoughts together, these were the conclusions that I came to. However, I did save the best for last because now I want to discuss the areas in which Ultimate Alliance 2 excels.
You like American? Yeah! You stupid, vaguely foreign freaks! You ruined my vacation! And you! Dumb as nails shield clones! I saw what you did to those cherry blossoms back there! You think those things grow on trees? And you think it makes me less of a man if I came here for the Cherry Blossom Festival, huh? You're laughing with your eyes! I can see it! Fine! Time for a little boss battle, suckers!
As I've alluded to a few times now, the gameplay of Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 is where it really shines. The combat piggybacks off the first game, but makes a few modifications, primarily the new fusion system. You'll be able to combine powers with another character on your team for a big attack that can clear rooms and do major damage to bosses. You'll often initiate the same types of fusions regularly, such as having two characters run side by side, reflect a beam of energy, clear a circle of enemies, or blow up a giant chunk of debris. Depending on the characters you choose for these fusions, the visual differences will be unique, such as Juggernaut running in a ball of metal created by Magneto, or Juggernaut running in a spherical force field made by Invisible Woman. There are a lot of these unique flares to experiment with, and they are very satisfying to use. The combat outside of fusions is still fun too. The light and heavy combo attacks are still here and are still a joy to use. However, grabbing and throwing enemies isn't as useful or satisfying this time around, but I honestly didn't feel the need to use it often anyway. The abilities menu is a little bit different too. Instead of being able to pick between different ability options in the first game, each character is locked into their 4 default abilities that you will unlock as you progress. I'm not a fan of less options, but like with throwing enemies, I didn't really have a problem with it because I liked the default abilities that were given. A change that I do like is the ability to use points to improve certain aspects of your hero, such as gaining stamina for every defeated foe, or improving melee attack damage. Some of these are also unlocked depending on the side you chose, giving you more incentive to replay the story again after beating it. I also found that a lot of the buffs were really thematic, based on the character and not just a cookie-cutter approach of improving the same stats for everyone, which is something I appreciated. Even though I knocked the game for not having the Blur Studio cinematic cutscenes, the in-game graphics are a big improvement over the first game. Faces have more clarity and costumes look more vibrant. The game as a whole looks much more polished and looks a lot better compared to the first game. I can't say that I dig all of the new character models, even when compared to the first game, for example Nick Fury and Spider-Man, but overall I would say that the character models are an improvement. There are some characters that I think look especially great here though, like Luke Cage and Deadpool. I also think that they really nailed the fire effects for characters like Human Torch. Another big improvement added to the sequel is that the characters' lips will sync with their dialogue.
I ain't no government puppet, and I assume you feel the same way. There are worse things you could do than risk jail time to do the right thing.
This is pretty much taken for granted nowadays, but back then this was a notable feature. We should also talk about the playable character roster. The size of the roster is slightly less than the first game. Ultimate Alliance 1 had 33 characters, while Ultimate Alliance 2 has 30. So not a big drop, but still a drop, which further accentuates my feelings of less in the game. But the roster itself isn't bad. 10 characters from the first game have been swapped out for new characters in the sequel. Characters like Ghost Rider, Silver Surfer, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Woman have been removed and replaced with characters like Green Goblin, Iron Fist, Carnage, and Penance. I personally lean more towards the first game's roster since I feel like it's more varied and covers more dark and mystical characters, but I could totally see how someone would prefer the new roster, especially if you like a lot of villains. They're all a blast to play as too. Carnage stands out from the pack for me, with phenomenal creepy voice acting and brutal attacks.
Never take the easy way out. We'll blaze you out!
Green Goblin is very thematic in that you can shoot bullets and blast rockets from your glider as additional moves unique to him. Even though I ultimately prefer the first game's roster since there are more of those characters that I wish returned for the sequel, I still like this roster and thoroughly enjoyed the new characters. I like that other characters got a chance to shine, and I think they are all fun to play. Characters like Iron Fist and Gambit were characters I had wished were in the first game, so I'm glad to see them here now. Throughout the story, you can find different tokens that correspond to a certain hero. For example, find enough Asgardian runes and you unlock Thor, who I think is one of the best characters in the game. You can also unlock Hulk and Jean Grey, who are enjoyable in their own right too. Overall, I would say that the standout features for Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 are its improved visuals and the combat, especially the fusion system. Team Ninja, the developers of the third game, must have been impressed by Vicarious Vision's fusion system as well, because they would later take this feature and run with it, enhance it, and make it a fundamental aspect of the combat. I don't blame them either, it's by far the best part of Ultimate Alliance 2, and I think it's what most people remember about it. But I think that sums up the positives and negatives of Ultimate Alliance 2, so let's move into the conclusion.
Great. Here we go again.
Hey, Fury, where's that Bravo team you've been trying to reach?
Communication's still jammed. Someone's gonna have to go round them up. And you just volunteered.
What? And leave all the fun to you girls? Bite me, Fury.
No time to argue, Shorty. Take West with you. Locate Bravo team and find another way into that castle.
You heard the man, Webhead. Let's move.
Yeah. Sheesh. Respect.
Over the course of this video, I've been doing a lot of comparison between the first game and the second game, which I think is only natural when you're discussing a sequel. However, the first game set such a high bar that I've tried my best to think about how it would fare as a standalone game as well. If Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 was the only Ultimate Alliance game, I don't think it would change much of how I feel. I think the disappointment of it not meeting or exceeding the expectations of its predecessor are certainly there, but I don't think it's able to do a whole lot on its own to stand out anyway. I often wonder if Ultimate Alliance 2 had been the first game, would it have been successful enough to get its own sequel? It's tough to say, but I would have to assume no, especially since the Ultimate Alliance franchise disappeared for 10 years after this game. The combat system was great, and I love the implementation of the fusion system, and I respect that Vicarious Visions were willing to take some risks on new features, but the game overall felt middle of the road for me. I hate to be negative about it because I truly do love the Ultimate Alliance franchise, and I plan on revisiting each of the games in the series, but it's the honest conclusion that I've come to. I think the combat of Ultimate Alliance 2 really carries the game, and it's the main reason I'll return to play it. Not for the story or the different sides of Civil War, but because the combat is just so damn fun to play. Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 is still a game I would recommend to fans though. There are a lot of Marvel characters and all of them have enjoyable gameplay. If you've read Civil War or seen the movie and wanted to experience it play out in a game, this will definitely scratch that itch. Overall, I wanted more from the story, but what it delivers is still worthwhile. As far as scoring, I'd personally rate Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 an 8 out of 10, which I would deem as a good game. I enjoyed it, I played it twice for this retrospective, and I plan on replaying it again when I get nostalgic, but I don't feel as eager and enthusiastic to play it as I did for the first game. There's still a lot to love in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 though, and if you've still got it sitting around on a disc somewhere, or if you've managed to snatch up the digital remaster before it was pulled from stores, I'd recommend you play it again if you're ever in the mood. It's a lot of fun, and it's cool to see how it differs from the other two games, and where the third game drew inspiration from. But those were my thoughts on Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, but I'm interested to hear how you all felt about the game in the comments below. Do you wish Galactus had been the main villain? Did you connect with the Civil War adaptation more than I did? I'd be curious to know. This video took me a long time to write because I really struggled with my own internal Civil War as I attempted to pinpoint where exactly Ultimate Alliance 2 wasn't clicking for me. I had fun, but I constantly felt like things were missing, so I'd love to hear other perspectives. Retrospectives are also a new series I'm hoping to make into a recurring thing, ideally revisiting many more Marvel games of the past. Some that I'd like to get to next are Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects, the 2004 Punisher game, and X-Men Legends, but I'm also very open to suggestions on what you would like to see covered as well. I'd also be interested to hear if you like the current format of these videos, or if you would prefer other angles be covered more or less. These are longer videos in nature, so I want to make sure I'm hitting all of the points you're most interested in. So expect more retrospective videos on Marvel games coming to this channel, And if you haven't seen it already, there's also my retrospective for Ultimate Alliance 1, where I am much more positive. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Smart guy. But I'll take a shield nurse over him any day.
So how are you feeling?
How does it look like I'm feeling?
Could be a lot worse, all things considered. Everyone else who was infected is pretty much recovered, but the stuff that Tinker put in you was 10 times.
Yeah, I know. But believe me, I know. Listen, guys, about all this, I just wanted to,
You can stop there, Nick. There's plenty of blame to go around, on all sides.
And plenty of cleaning up yet to do.
Yeah, there is that. I know you'll put it right. Get things back to where they used to be.
I'm not sure things will ever be quite the same as they used to be.
No, but that doesn't mean they can't be good again.